Have you used chat mats in your classroom? Even if you haven't, I'm sure that you've heard about this useful tool to support students. Today, Christina Margiore, who is a Spanish teacher on Long Island, New York, joins me to talk all about the details involved with creating and using chat mats in our language classroom. If you're already using them, you'll get some new ideas for sure. New to chat mats? No problem. You'll be ready to use them soon with ease. So let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and you are an incredible teacher. Just remember that. You're doing something like listening to a podcast about language teaching. And I always say, who does that? Well, you do that because you're awesome. So thank you so much for being here and doing that. Today, we're going to be talking about chat mats. Now, you likely have heard about chat mats. Maybe you've seen them around. Maybe they've been talked about at a conference. Maybe you've seen your colleagues using them, or you're using them on your own in your classroom as well. But today, I have Christina Margiore here, who is going to be talking with us about using chat mats. And you're going to get some ideas for using them perhaps in different ways if you already are. And hopefully, if you haven't used them yet, you're going to be thinking about all these ways that you can use chat mats in your classroom after this conversation today. So Christina Margiore is known as the Super Senora in the interwebs and out there on the internet, and her website and her social media. That's how I've gotten to know her. I've actually worked in her school a couple of times and done some consulting with her department. So we have been in contact for a couple of years now, and she has been teaching Spanish for 15 years on Long Island. And she is a high school Spanish teacher, and she also teaches AP, and she teaches in an IB program. So really getting into those upper levels there for sure. She's very involved in her state organization of NYSEFELT, as well as LILT, which is the Long Island Language Teachers Association. And she was actually the co-chair of one of their recent conferences that happened in her district. So very involved in the language teaching community. So I think I got it all out there, quick and easy, Christina Margiore, but thank you so much for being here on the World Language Classroom Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to chat about chat mats today.
Okay, chat about chat mats. Love it. That should be the hashtag of the episode.
Yes. Okay, there we go. We got it right away. Love it.
Anything you want to add in about what you're doing out there?
No, I think you covered it all. Like you said, I've been teaching since 2009, mainly high school. But it's interesting that you mentioned the IB and AP because that's really what kind of got me started with the chat mats, because I am teaching some of those upper level classes, but then I also have level 2, or every once in a while I'll get a middle school class and I have to kind of adjust and pivot like we all do.
Okay, so let's go right after these chat mats. So first off, tell us what they are and why we should be using them. Give us the elevator pitch for what we should be doing tomorrow in our classrooms.
Sure. Well, first thing is it sounds like, oh my gosh, a new thing, scary. I can't do it. I can't take on anymore. I totally get that. It's actually pretty easy. It's basically a resource that you're using that will support your students during instruction. So I know a lot of us have word walls, or we have anchor charts and things in our physical classroom that support our students in our classes. Unfortunately, for a lot of teachers, me being one of them, we don't have our own classroom. So we don't have a wall. We don't have a place to hang things because sometimes, I could be sharing a room with history, with English, I was in a biology classroom last year teaching. So we don't have that physical space, but our students still need that support. So I said, okay, what else can I do? And I came across this idea of chat mats, and I just started creating them. So they're a sheet of paper that have your keywords, your phrases, your questions, your sentence starters, whatever your students need to know to help them with their production of language. And it's just right in front of them to help.
So this is a sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a physical sheet. Could it be digital as well, or do you typically use a physical sheet of paper?
It absolutely can be digital. When we were, all online teaching, there were plenty of ways I pushed that out to my students digitally. I prefer paper because I think just kids like that tactile, hands-on thing in front of them. And I also like for them to be able to add their own words in the moment or a phrase if they are looking for something, or if we go over a word that I write down and say, oh, you might need to know this later, they can write it on their chat mat. So I want it to be accessible, and I want it to be something they can add to.
Okay, so now let's get into the details of what it physically looks like, right? So they have this sheet, and you can take any particular unit that you want to use as an example, but what are you putting on this chat mat, and what are students doing with it?
Again, there's no one size fits all. Every chat mat that you make can look a little bit different, and they should, because they're going to serve a different purpose. So let's start with, I really came across this when I was doing a debate in my class. I love for my students to practice spoken language, because that, I think, is when students really feel in the real world that they've made it, like they can have a conversation, they can speak to someone in Spanish. So I really like for them to get as much practice as possible with speaking. So I said, debate. This is, my IB1 year 1 class, my juniors. Let's try a debate on technology. It'll be fun. It's relevant. I had it all planned out. I had great topics. They were all excited about it. But I hit this hump of, I don't know debate phrases. Like, my students didn't know how to say, I disagree, I agree, you're wrong, this is my evidence. Can you get, just those fillers. And so the debate, the first time I did it, did not go well because they were so stuck on those phrases. So after that, I thought, okay, for next year, I need to do this differently. So what the chat mat looks like for them is I have think on your sheet of paper, a rectangle, a table with space in the middle for them to write and add their words. And then on the outside, on the perimeter of that, I have words like I agree, I disagree, I believe, I think, it's important that, it's good that, it's bad that. Just those filler words that if in a quick moment they need to look down and reference, they have it there for them.
So are you creating these chat mats specifically by unit? How does that process work for you?
Yeah, so I think we can have a bunch of core chat mats that we use throughout the year. So I have the Sweet 16 verbs in the YO form, in the LAO STED form. And I have those, I give those to my students. Let's say we're in an upper level class and we're doing something that requires past tense. I might make one with just common past tense phrases that they would need, and they can reference those all year long. But for something specific, you may want to make one specific to your unit vocabulary. Mm-hmm. Or let's say you're doing an IPA, an integrated performance assessment, and your students have to complete a specific task. You may want to make a specific chat mat with expressions, words, or phrases they're going to need.
I was thinking about this idea of, do you start from scratch each time or do you build on? And I've always had this idea in my head that the chat mats that I've seen, and even the ones I've used myself, they're finite and they don't have that space for students to add on that you have mentioned. Right. So I'm already having all these ideas about how I'm going to modify my own chat mats.
Right. Yeah, I think, again, it depends. If you want it for a conversation, you want them to have room to jot down a quick thought or an idea. Because if we give them something, just like if you have a wall in your classroom and you cover it with words, if there's too many things on this paper, it becomes overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And it becomes more of a struggle for them to find what they need. And we're trying to make it easier for them to find what they need.
Mm-hmm. So if I kind of piggyback on that overwhelm word that you just used, I would like your insights. When I'm creating a chat mat, I find it really hard to pare down the information that I'm putting on there. It's the how many different ways can you say a preference?
Right.
There are maybe 20 and they don't need 20. So what's your process of paring it down from all the possibilities to what would be useful for them?
That is tricky. I'm not going to lie. There are times where I'm going, and I'm like, okay, I have way too many words on here and I have to pare it back. And that's when I think it's okay to say, all right, well, can I use one chat mat at the beginning of the unit and one towards the end? We don't have to give them everything at once. So I think simple is better because we don't want to overwhelm them. Your more advanced students are going to be the ones that are writing and adding all of those upper level or higher words anyway. And your lower level students that still need the support will have that basic right in front of them. And we don't want to overwhelm them, because if we give them a sheet with 50 words and phrases on it, and even though it looks pretty and they're scattered around, it's going to be way too much for their brain to handle.
And are these typically one page or one page two-sided? How does that work?
I like the one page. I'm not afraid to give them more than one within a unit. A little pro tip for anyone that wants to try it is if you get one of those big packs of those sheet protectors that I know when I first started teaching, I had all of my binders of my copies and I had the sheet protectors. Now everything's digital, so we don't do that anymore. But you can buy a big pack of sheet protectors and give just each kid a sheet protector to use throughout the year. And they can just add their chat mats in there. Now it's easy to find, and also it will kind of protect them. They can pull them out, they can write on it and stick it right back in there.
And you use a template where each chat mat that you're doing, they're sort of set up in the same way so students see how it's organized. And what does that look like?
I like the rectangular template where I create a table in, I like to use either PowerPoint or Google Slides, which sounds funny. I don't think a lot of people realize you can use them to create just regular documents. You don't have to do a presentation. You just change the slide size to paper size. So 11 by 8.5 or 8.5 by 11. I like to make it in there because I can layer and move things around much easier than Word. I think we've all worked in Word and you move one thing and your entire document is ruined and you're in tears, right? Yes. So I like to work in either PowerPoint or Slides. So let's say Google Slides. I think everyone's pretty familiar. You can insert a table. Let's do a 5 by 5. And now I'll highlight the squares that are in the middle. So I want to keep the 5 across the top, on the sides, and then across the bottom. And I'll highlight the ones in the middle. And if you go to, I believe it's format or it's table, and you merge the cells, it'll get rid of those boxes in the middle. And that's the space I'll use for my students to write. I have a nice blank space in the middle. I add the expressions along the outside. And it's just a nice way for them to organize their thoughts. I tend to use that a lot. If I am going to put a bunch of different words or expressions, like let's say, going back to my debate example, expressing agreement, expressing disagreement, and then expressing opinion. So I have 3 different things. I might just make a table, 3 different tables of just one, row straight or column straight down rather, and then just have 3 tables: expressing agreement, disagreement, expressing opinion. Again, in the moment, it's quick and easy for them to find what they need.
And when it comes to using something like chat mats, this whole procedure, it's not even really a procedure, but it's a tool reference in the classroom. I'm sure many teachers are using them in different ways. So I'm really looking to get the specifics about what's worked for you. And so one thing that I've always been curious about how other teachers do this is, do you only use it as practice and formative, or do you allow for students to reference it when they're doing summative or IPA assessments?
That is a great question. And I think everyone will have a different answer they feel comfortable with personally, right? In my opinion, it's a tool. And my job as the teacher is to prepare them for that. Let's think about my IB class, right? At the end of it, they have to speak to me for 12 to 15 minutes in Spanish, one-on-one. Why am I going to strip them of everything throughout the whole year and just say, okay, do a 12 to 15 minute with me over and over and over again with no support? My job is to build them up to that 12 to 15 minutes. So I feel comfortable allowing my students to have those expressions in front of them when we're doing assignments in class. You can even use chat mats for writing. They're great for a writing assignment. So if my IB students are working on a writing, and let's say, it's a letter to the principal to convince him of something, that debate chat mat will come in handy with I agree or I disagree, I express my opinion. They can use those keywords and phrases, but they still have to be able to express themselves with detail. And that's where it's going to fall on them, because they can't just use my, yo creo que, yo pienso que, and mi opinión, and put nothing after it. They have to be able to add on to it. So I feel comfortable allowing them to use it as a support, just like teachers have word walls or anchor charts up throughout the year.
I've found when I've tried to have students use them, or I would tell them you can reference it, they often have it in their hand or have it on the table. And just knowing that it's there helps to build their confidence, and they don't really even reference it that much.
Yes, it becomes like a safety net or, something comfortable for them. And I find the same thing. One of my favorite activities in class to do is a Socratic seminar, where I give students a list of discussion questions ahead of time. They prepare ahead of time. And then we come in and we have an organic, spontaneous conversation. So they can think about these questions, but the conversation can turn one way or another that we don't expect. So they have to be prepared for that. So I absolutely let them have the chat mat in front of them. And most students are not even looking at it. They beg for it. Please, can we have it? Can we have it? And I say, sure, you can have it in front of you. And then they don't even use it because they just get wrapped up in the conversation. But the nice part is, let's say you have a student who struggles and who normally wouldn't volunteer to participate. This chat mat is their safety, and it's basically no excuse. You have what you need in front of you. You can't say, oh, I didn't know how to say I disagree, so I couldn't speak in class today. You have it in front of you. So here's your opportunity to jump in when you feel comfortable.
So you've given a couple of examples with the debate and using it at that upper level and having the different, they're essentially sentence starters, right? And some vocabulary that are helping them. And then you had also mentioned at the beginning that you've used them with lower levels as well. And so if you could just tell us a little bit about what a chat mat would look like for a level 1 or a level 2, like what would be the themes and vocabulary on one of those?
For lower levels, you're doing something maybe like a turn and talk, right? To get them used to conversations. We're still having that idea of getting them to use the language, but in shorter chunks maybe, or a shorter writing. We're eventually going to ask them to maybe write a journal entry or a letter, but it'll just be shorter than what they're doing in an advanced class. So they can still use this chat mat. It's just going to have your basic expressions. So instead of at my IB level where we have yo recomiendo que, and I want them to use the subjunctive, or si yo fuera, and I want them to use the si clause, maybe at the lower level, it's just me gusta, no me gusta, yo soy, yo estoy, whatever your focus is, you're giving that to them. And I think in the lower levels, it's even more important to have that, to build that confidence for them. Just, wow, I can have a conversation. Look, I spoke to someone for 2 or 3, exchanges in Spanish. And I think it's even more important at the lower levels to have that.
So can you give us an idea of looking at one of your classes, take any one of the classes that you want, and where within, say, we'll just use an hour-long period. I don't know how long your classes are, but let's use that as an example. Like, where would you use a chat mat, like in your flow of a class?
So I love to start with some sort of turn and talk or an interesting question or statement, just to get the Spanish brain on, I call it, turn on the Spanish brain, get it flowing a little bit. So right from the beginning, they can have it right in front of them. At the high school with the older students, I do ask them to be more in charge of it. I don't feel like I should constantly have to say, take out your chat mat we're going to do a turn and talk. Please take out your chat mat. In the beginning of the year, if we set that expectation of during a turn and talk, you can use a chat mat, then whenever we have a turn and talk, they can have it out. And that eventually, as you mentioned, as the year goes on, they might just say, I don't need that. I'm just going to have the conversation. So right from the start, I think it's nice to have it out. And then it just serves as a support for whatever we're doing for the lesson. If we're within a specific topic, I may say it might be a good idea to take out the chat mat with the travel phrases or vocabulary because we're going to be, discussing something or we're going to be writing something about that. So you may want to take that out. The nice thing with this is trying to put a little bit of the responsibility on the students to take charge of their learning. I have this resource in my bag that I can use when I need it, and I can add to it what I need. And it's nice because a shy student may not want to say, I forgot how to say because, or I forgot how to say although or something, because at the end of the day, teenagers don't want to be embarrassed. So they don't want to look silly or stupid in front of their friends, right? So they don't want to ask that dumb question or what they feel like is a dumb question. So this is a nice way to put it in front of them and they can keep track of their own words that they need throughout the year.
And I'm assuming, based on the way you're talking about how invested you are in your teaching, that you're a backwards planner, I'm assuming, right?
Yes.
And so in
Yes.
my mind, you are for sure creating this chat mat before you start the unit. And now it has everything possible for that unit, all the vocabulary and phrases that you might get to. So when are you giving that to students? Is it at the beginning of the unit so they have it to reference?
I think about what do I want my students to be able to do at the end of this unit? Are they talking about planning a trip in another country? Are they going to be interviewing a friend about preferences? What do I want them to be able to do? And then what vocabulary will they need to be able to do that? And then I think you can come up with your basic chat mat, your basic design. And I think that this will depend on your style of teaching. And are you leading with some basic vocabulary? Are you going for the more comprehensible input approach? Everybody's a little bit different, but I think that I like to give them in the beginning more so that we can build on it. And then let's say we're halfway through the unit and students are really struggling with a particular part, and I didn't expect that. I can make another chat mat, and it does not have to be fancy. It does not have to take a lot of time. You shouldn't be spending hours of your prep creating this. You can start with a few and add in more as you see fit.
I'm thinking that we could possibly even go on ChatGPT and it will understand what a chat mat is and give us a couple of examples of what we could put on there.
I have not tried it yet, but it probably can, because every day I see more and more abilities of ChatGPT, which is scary, but also exciting.
Right? Yeah. Like you could go on and say, I'm creating a chat mat and I would like 7 expressions of preference in Spanish. It will give you that.
Definitely. And you know what? Sometimes we get stuck in the rut and you forget a certain expression or word that maybe your students need. So it might be a great tool just to remind you, like, oh, hey, what about that word?
For some teachers who may be taking this on for the first time, considering it for the first time, do you have some tips to share with them about how they should start and get going with it?
Yeah, sure. I think, don't be afraid. There's no incorrect way to do this. You can do it any way that works for you and works for your students. Any of the ways I've mentioned are ways that I've tried and I like and that work for me. That doesn't mean that that's the end all be all. There are plenty of different styles. A lot of people also use images in chat mats, which I think is great, especially going back to the novice classes. Let's say you're doing weather. You can have chat mats with the Spanish and English, or you can have a photo and then the Spanish. So there's different ways to do it. It gets a little challenging at those upper levels with some of the, more advanced vocabulary. So that's why I don't tend to do that a lot, just because my experience is more in the upper levels. But you can have images. I think the biggest thing is just remember not to overload. You don't want to put too much at once. You don't have to put every word and expression students need on one single chat mat. They can have multiple throughout the year.
I can definitely see that you are someone that is involved in your continued growth as a teacher. So could you share with us some recommendations you might have for teachers to continue with their professional growth?
Go to as many conferences as you can, local, state, national, if you can. There's just so much great information out there, and there are so many wonderful teachers willing to share. And it really just sparks your motivation and your enthusiasm for your classes. It's also wonderful that we have the internet and we can connect with people all over the world at any time. So I love connecting with people on social media. I think sometimes it can be a lot and you feel like you have to do everything that everybody else is doing, and you don't. But there are so many great teachers out there, whatever social media you like. I spend way too much time on Instagram, so that's where I like to hang out. But wherever you are, there are great teachers out there.
If some of our listeners want to create with that expert, wonderful teacher, Super Senora Christina Margiore, how can they be connecting with you?
Sure. So like I said, spending way too much time on Instagram, so you can connect with me there. It's at Super Senora, all spelled out. I also have a blog, supersenora.com, where I try to just share my ideas, my journey with teaching, and, just reflecting on my year as I go.
Could you just share a little bit of a piece of advice? You just gave us some great recommendations, but any more advice for teachers who are just maybe trying something new in the classroom? Anything about teaching that you can give us some advice on?
So I have two things. One just popped in my head, but one I was thinking about beforehand is don't be afraid to try something more than once. So my first chat mat did not look anything like what I'm doing right now. And you might try something once and it takes a left turn and you say, whoa, this was terrible, but give it another go. Because don't forget, every time we introduce a new activity or a new resource into our classroom, our students have to master the directions. They have to master the expectations. So it's probably not going to go smoothly the first time. Sometimes the stars align and it's wonderful and it's great, but that doesn't often happen. So it's okay to go back and try something again and just give things a chance to get better, and give yourself a chance to get better and adjust and change. So that's one piece of advice. And the other piece of advice that I have is just that your classroom community, I think, is the most important thing. So for new teachers, for teachers starting the school year, just think about connecting with your students and building those relationships, because at the end of the day, our content is, of course, important, but our connections with our students is the most important. And if your students enjoy your class, and I'm not saying every day has to be a carnival and fun and exciting and games, but if your students enjoy your class and they know that you care about them, they're going to show up and they're going to try their best.
Thank you very much for that and for everything that you have shared. And I'm definitely going to be trying out some new things with chat mats and leaving space for students to put their own words in rather than having to do it all from the beginning. So thank you for all the tips you gave along the way. And just ending with that idea of connections over the content is so important. So thank you for highlighting that right at the end. This has been wonderful. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much for being here today, Christina.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. And if anyone's trying something out and, they feel stuck or they have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time.
What are your takeaways from that conversation with Christina Margiore? I hope you got some new ideas for setting up chat mats if you're using them already, and that you're inspired to try them out if they're new to you. Be sure to check out the show notes to connect with Christina. You'll also see the link to sign up for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. There are also links to get in touch with me if you would like to work together, either in person in your school or remotely. Talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. Connect with me on X, aka Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WL Classroom. And for even more valuable resources, visit my website, WLClassroom.com, where you'll find over 300 blog posts about language teaching. So stay inspired, keep growing, and continue making a difference in your language classroom.